5:32 p.m. Welcome to the May 12th, 2021 meeting of the City of Eugene Budget Committee. It is a privilege to be here tonight, and I want to observe that everyone participating, be they a member of our committee, a member of city staff, or a viewer watching at home watching live or after the fact, all of us are able to be here as a matter of privilege. Not every member of our community would be able to join these proceedings, and some of those community members who cannot join us are also the ones who will be affected the most by the budget we ultimately approve. I ask everyone to keep this point in mind throughout our work tonight. With that said, thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using in response to Governor Brown's Stay Home, Save Lives order. This format enables the Budget Committee to meet, hear from the community, and take care of business while keeping its members, staff, and the public safe. Following our first item tonight, there will be a time for public comment. There are several housekeeping announcements and instructions related to the meeting format that I need to take care of first. Thank you for your patience while I work through them. Anyone wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the City of Eugene Budget Committee webpage. For those who join the meeting via computer, device, or phone, your microphone, webcam, and phone are automatically muted when you enter the meeting as an attendee. If you wish to participate during the public comment portion of the meeting and haven't already done so, please raise your virtual hand in one of two ways to join the speaker's queue now. You can raise the hand by, if you are viewing on a computer, laptop, or other device, you click once on the blue hand icon, or if you are listening to the meeting on a phone, you can press *9. We will continue accepting raised hands until 5:40 p.m. That is another 6 minutes. The meeting moderator will unraise or disallow any requests to speak that are made after that deadline. Finally, I want to thank everyone for their patience, flexibility, and good humor as we work through any kinks with this format that is very new to most of us. As always, feel free to contact the Budget Committee or Budget Office if there is testimony you are not able to provide or wish to get to us in a different manner. And that said, now I will move to our first agenda item, turning to the committee members to point out that in your packet, we have minutes from our last meeting on April 28th. So are there any recommended changes or comments for those minutes at this time? I am seeing none. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
I have a motion from Councilor.
Stop. It's not your turn.
And I don't think we can accept a second from Councilor Evans's dog. Does anyone want a second?
I'll second that.
I have a second from Raina Jackson. We didn't have any comments on the motions, I'm assuming, or on the minutes. I'm guessing no discussion there. All in favor of approving the minutes? I saw 13 hands from all 13 committee members who now are in that I can count. Any abstentions? I don't see any. Any opposed? As I counted, staff, please correct me if you saw something different, but I believe that motion carries unanimously and the April 28th minutes are approved. Thank you very much. The next agenda item is going to be public comment, but we do have a few more minutes before that begins. So I want to take this moment to just offer a reminder about how we're going to do motions over the course of this budget process to our committee. We're going to do about the same thing we did last year. I will also reiterate this at the end of the meeting, but what we're going to do is all of our motions are going to be in our final meeting on May 26th. It is very helpful if you indicate ahead of time that you plan to make those motions. You can use deliberation at prior meetings, including when we deliberate tonight, as a great opportunity to signal motions that you're planning to make. And please work with finance staff and reach out to them on any motions you want to have. That will give us the opportunity, or that will give staff the opportunity to go over language with you, make sure that the motions are structured in a way that will work. And then from there, we can be in a better position to work our way through those motions at that final meeting in a nice, clean way. And we still have a couple minutes before public comment is scheduled to begin. And I ran out of filler. I suppose I can go ahead and give the intro to, there's a few more instructions in the intro section on public comment. So I'll just, in 2 minutes, we will begin public comment on the fiscal year 22 proposed budget. This period is for those wishing to make comment on the budget. If you would like to speak during public comment, you must have virtually raised your hand. We have just a little bit of time to still add yourself to that queue by pressing *9 on your phone or by pressing the raise hand button on your device. And once the period to do that ends, the meeting moderator will unraise or disallow any further requests to speak. When we begin, each person will have 2.5 minutes to give their testimony. And we have a total of 45 minutes allotted for public comment, which, unless a whole bunch more hands raise in the next minute, looks like it will probably be enough time. So we are going to go ahead and use that 2.5 minute time frame. And then the meeting moderator, as we work through the list, will announce the next 2 speakers at a time. When it is your turn, your name will be announced. You'll be promoted to panelist. Please preface your statement with your name, city of residence, and for Eugene residents, your ward if known. You will have the 2.5 minutes to comment. There are lights on the timer on the screen. The yellow light indicates 30 seconds remaining. When your time concludes, the moderator will demote you back to attendee status, muting your microphone. If you have connected via phone and don't have the benefit of seeing the timer, please be aware that your microphone will still be muted at that 2.5 minute mark. And that got us to 5:40. Do we have a count of how many people we have signed up for public comment officially?
Hi, we have 10 people signed up for public comment.
Perfect. In that case, I will let our meeting moderator take it from there and work through that list of 10 people.
So first we have Max Rink, followed by Zondi. Max, I'm promoting you now. You're added as a panelist.
Just one moment. Hello, my name is Max Rink. I'm a homeowner in Ward 3. Can you hear me? Yes. This is the first budget committee meeting I've attended, so I'd like you to know I appreciate that creating and managing city budgets is a huge task, and I appreciate your efforts to that end. Tonight, I want to address budgeting for EPD. First, as city councilors are already aware, I would like to make sure that the civilian members of this committee are also aware of the existence of the Eugene Police Foundation, otherwise known as EPF, and that you are aware of the Eugene Police Foundation's relationship to EPD, and of the clear moral and ethical conflicts of interest presented by the fact that Irene Alltucker, the director of the EPF, at least until April of this year, is the wife of Kevin Alltucker, who has been the city's staff leader of the Community Safety Initiative from its first public appearance, as well as the lead facilitator of the Ad Hoc Committee on Police Policy and the CSI engagement sessions. According to the Eugene Police Foundation's website, the EPF is a community-based 501c3 nonprofit. Quote, formed in August of 2016 to support the overall performance capability of the Eugene Police Department by providing financial and organizational support for things such as acquisition of specialized safety equipment and training, and fostering communications awareness, partnerships, and positive working relationships between EPD and the community. This is an organization where every dollar that an unknown membership gives will, quote, go directly to support Eugene Police in 3 vital areas: community partnerships, employee development, police service enhancements. With this in mind, I ask, 1, that all budget committee members disclose during this meeting whether or not they are also members of the Eugene Police Foundation. And 2, since no official budget document I could find on the City of Eugene website contains even a single record of funds or in-kind donations received by EPD from EPF, or how those were spent or allocated, that before making any recommendations on police budgeting for 2022, this committee insists on clear, publicly available line item accounting for these items for the last 5 years, as well as for the entire city's budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Next we have Zondi, followed by Jacob True. Zondi, I'm promoting you to a panelist, and you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. As just a quick thing that I generally don't have time to request, it would be great, I think, for these public forums, if it would be possible, or you can get feedback from other people, to read the entire list of names in the order it's predicted. I know that gets shuffled sometimes if people's technology is not working or whatever, but as someone who's looking to speak, obviously this one might run 25 minutes, but sometimes they run 90 minutes, and to have no idea when it's okay to go to the bathroom or to attend to our children, it is very hard. So it would be very handy from my point of view if a list could be provided at the beginning. This is the expected order of speakers, and then you can still do the 2-name thing. I want to say that it is discouraging to hear counselors say this in response to graffiti at counselors' houses. And I do understand that that can be scary to children. Jennifer Ye, I've heard you correspond with my partner. He and I are separate people. I don't entirely support the communication as he wrote it. And I also understand there's misperceptions in both directions. However, first of all, if we were going to talk about scared children, we need to recognize the children of people whose parents have been killed by the cops in this community, and the people who look in skin color like those families. So there is just no comparison to the level of terror that those kids feel. And I know personally some of those children. And I think if you met those children, you might feel differently too. Secondly, I would like to say that at the presentation of the CSI listening sessions on Monday, city staff reviewed the 2 listening sessions that were for general audiences, and they said something in the range of 100 people spoke, and they gave a summary of the themes. The top item named was law enforcement. That summary for what was heard, when only of the roughly 100 people, only 3 people did not speak critically of EPD. Those 3 people were Sean Shivers, who's on the police commission, Brittany Quick Warner, who is the—
I'm sorry, we're out of time for your public comment. Thank you. Next, we have Jacob True, followed by Jim New. Jacob, I'm promoting you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
Oh, sorry about that. Appear to be on now. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jacob True. I'm from Eugene. I'm in Ward 1, so that would be Emily Simple's ward. Apologies, my kiddo couldn't resist hopping up on my lap. Continuing on with some of the themes that the prior speaker introduced, I was also, I attended the presentation of the CSI initiative, and was similarly disturbed by the fact that yes, in the community engagement sessions, all 100 people that attended those, indeed only 3 spoke in favor of increasing police presence or anything along those lines. And like the previous speaker said, they were representatives of the police department. The rest of the attendees made comments along the lines of wanting to increase funding for homelessness services and in decreasing the amount spent on police services. I noticed that in the budget as presented right now, that the police department budget is increasing by 1.3%, or just shy of $1 million, mostly on the back of the CSI fund. Of that, the proposed budget has $4.682 million flowing in from the Community Safety Fund to the police department. And I would suggest that that allocation is a poor use of resources. The money would be much better spent on preventative measures as opposed to increasing police spending, which not only doesn't make us safer, as is shown by their broadening response times. That was part of the CSI initiative, as I understand it, to begin with, but effectively a wasteful use of public funds. I would recommend that we decrease funding to the police department. Definitely do not increase it, and instead allocate those to a cahoots, the cahoots method, split it off from the police department under the funding there. That'd be a great start. And overall increase funding for housing, safety that does not involve armed police officers whose training is mostly towards shooting and not dealing with crises in a appropriate manner. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Next, we have Jim New, followed by Ethan Klein. Jim, I'm promoting you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
City Council members and Budget Committee members, just somebody nod if you can hear me. Great, thank you. My name is Jim New. I live in Ward 7. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. 2 years ago, the City of Eugene made a commitment to address the climate crisis by adopting the Climate Action Plan 2.0 in order to meet the goals of the Climate Recovery Ordinance. As you prepare the budget for the next year, it is imperative that funding for programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions, educate the public about reducing their carbon footprint, and equitably support those most vulnerable to climate disruption. I request that you allocate appropriate funding for staff to implement funding for permanent positions for Sustainability Commission staffing or Sustainability Commission staff, fund the Sustainability Commission grants program, fund the city bike and pedestrian project list from the Transportation System Plan, allocate funds from future federal American Rescue Plan to funding climate recovery actions to meet the goals of the CRO, fund the already approved by Council Home Energy Score program, which was in the CAP 2.0 action item number B4, fund support programs for low-income utility customers and/or support loans for energy efficiency improvement programs in the CAP 2.0, it was action B2, and Fund Electrical Vehicle Action Plan, CAP Actions T20 through T27. I thank you for your time and your commitment to service.
Thank you, Jim. Next, we have Ethan Klein, followed by Ian Winbrock. Ethan, I'm promoting you to panelist now. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you all hear me all right? Great. And I apologize for the cat in the background. He's quite vocal. My name is Ethan Klein, and I am also from Ward 1, Emily Semple's ward. The words I had prepared were going to be about abolitionist John Brown and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and how they were met with societal opposition to their stances on slavery and civil rights. I was going to compare those historic struggles with the current civil disobedience we are seeing play out today in response to the monopoly police have on our public safety systems. But last night, I had a difficult but important conversation with my wife, not only about what I'd prepared, but what materials will continue to be prepared by the public in the face of choices we don't agree with. You've already heard countless testimony that has included facts, numbers, suggestions, personal and professional recommendations, and grievances. You have, like those in your community, attended endless meetings, established and chaired committees and subcommittees, and taken time out of your busy days and lives to schedule one-on-ones and pour over hours of reports. Tonight, I only want to ask the Budget Committee and ostensibly our city leadership the following. What would it take to convince you all as individuals to defund the Eugene Police Department and reallocate those funds elsewhere? I'll be here for the entirety of the meeting, and I hope you can answer my question in the follow-up. I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Ethan. Next, we have Ian Winbrock, followed by Jackson Kellogg. Ian, I promoted you. You should be able to unmute yourself now.
How about now? Can you all hear me? Excellent. Technology, we can do this. Good evening, Budget Committee. My name's Ian Winbrock, and I'm a renter in the Whitaker neighborhood of Eugene, located in Ward 7. I also serve as the chair of the Whitaker Community Council, a Whitaker-based nonprofit organization, which also serves as the neighborhood association in the Whitaker. For almost 50 years, we've been able to develop and deliver community and economic development in partnership with other nonprofit organizations, businesses, and government agencies in Eugene's poorest neighborhood because of the funding we receive from the city of Eugene. These past 14 months have been no different than the past 46 years. When COVID hit, we used neighborhood outreach funding from the city of Eugene in order to provide much needed CDC-approved COVID infection and transmission prevention messaging to communities vulnerable to COVID in the Whitaker, including renters, elders, and the unhoused. Because of the modest neighborhood outreach funding provided to the Whitaker Community Council by the City of Eugene and the work we did, our organization is now receiving an ongoing grant from the Oregon Health Authority to conduct COVID-19 infection and transmission prevention campaigns, as well as a COVID-19 vaccine confidence campaign to some of the most vulnerable communities in Eugene that have a higher representation in our neighborhood than anywhere else in the city. Our campaigns have become a statewide model because they prioritize health equity. In the Whitaker, health equity means redistributing power systemically and organizationally so that our most vulnerable communities are able to speak for and represent themselves, advocate for their own health, all while having the historical barriers to public health access significantly reduced. Additionally, we've also held one of the largest COVID community clinics in Oregon south of Portland, vaccinating 500 people in a single day, including Councilmember Semple. We are looking forward to continuing to vaccinate hundreds in partnership with other nonprofits, neighborhood associations, and public health agencies from June through December of this year. All of this work has been possible because of the City of Eugene. The neighborhood outreach funding we receive from the Office of Human Rights and Neighborhood Involvement, as well as the neighborhood matching grants, are critical to our community being able to respond to COVID. Tonight, I'm asking that the Budget Committee recommend retaining the funding allocations for neighborhood associations for FY22 at the same levels as FY21. Having access to neighborhood outreach funding and neighborhood matching grants is critical to neighborhood associations so that we can collectively continue to fight against COVID and begin to engage in the important work of economic and social recovery. Thank you for the opportunity to comment, and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Ian. Next, we have Jackson Kellogg, followed by Matthew Uke. Jackson, promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself.
All right, great. Can you hear me? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for Budget Committee and City Councilors for agreeing to listen to my testimony. My name is Jackson Kellogg. I live in Ward 4. Jennifer Ye is my City Councilor, and I live in Eugene. And I'm just would like to urge you all to maintain neighborhood association funding at the same level for FY22. I'm chair of the Kellogg Neighborhood Association, and the work of neighborhood associations really helps solve problems on a local level because people know each other and they can work together constructively. And it does really great work. And the support we receive from the city is absolutely crucial to that with the city staff and also the funding for outreach. So thank you so much for considering this and for all your great work. Okay, thank you. I yield my time.
Thank you, Jackson. Next, we have Matthew Uke, followed by Eli. Matthew, I promoted you to panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello. Sorry, I'm Matthew Uke. I'm a resident of Ward 4. That was exciting to actually see Jackson there because I've been curious about the Kellogg Neighborhood Association, and I fall in that as opposed to Harlow, and also have Councilor Ye as my counselor. I came tonight with a question about what I understand of CSI budget that has already been allocated. Like 280,000 of it, I believe, went to that new command center that EPD picked up. And it looks like that there's a posting for a lateral police officer hiring on the Eugene City site. And I remember looking at the 2019 budget, it was over $560,000 to hire one new patrol officer in 2019. And so I want to make sure that these expenditures aren't coming out of that CSI budget necessarily, since it seems that we're given some time to debate and discuss some of this. I very much echo that more neighborhood association support is definitely something that Eugene can benefit from, and I yield the rest of my time. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, and housing, not more cops.
Thank you, Matthew. Next, we have Eli, and I don't have anyone else signed up for public comment afterwards. Eli, I promoted you to a panelist. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me? Hi, my name is Eli Brown. I live in Ward 1. I would like to speak about transparency first, and I appreciate a lot of the comments from the April meeting from the committee members about transparency, especially also Councilor Simple's question about the online budget tool. And I see that in the memo prepared by staff in response to the questions, that question is not answered. There are numerous columns from the budget that the online budget tool is based on from the Excel sheet that have been deleted from the publicly available budget. Why is that so? 50 organizations, faith communities, and businesses demanded earlier this year that the city publicly release the city's entire line item budget for the past 5 years in order to, quote, increase transparency to identify resources to address the housing crisis. Quote, the public has a right to know how public money is being spent. And the online budget tool should be based on the entire line item budgets as well. One of the first steps to creating any level of change, reform, and or accountability is full transparency and access to information. And there's no reason to hide this information from the public. And this is the opposite of transparency. Just like the chair, or was it, one of the committee members talked about, the complexity is the opposite of transparency. I'm just would like to ask a question: how is the public supposed to engage with the budget process if we don't know how the city has spent previous budgets or proposes to spend future budgets? I'd also like to echo Budget Committee members Catherine Ryan's request for a full picture of consolidated information of all of the funding for homeless services. This is very important, and it would be great if the city could also do the same thing for the massive amounts of resources that are being spent on criminalizing homelessness, because everyone knows that if we want homeless people off the streets, we must first stop criminalizing them and harming them and creating and making the problem worse. It's expensive and wasteful, and the city is not tracking how much money they are spending on all aspects of the criminalization of homelessness. And my time's up. Thanks.
That concludes our public comment.
Liz, thank you so much. I appreciate your running the queue, and thank you so much to every one of our speakers for being here. I really am glad we had that opportunity to hear from the public, and I hope that we keep in mind what you had to tell us and that it informs our work. Our next agenda item is a presentation on the Urban Renewal Agency, a basic 101 overview for those of us and those in the public who aren't super familiar with how urban renewal works, followed by the proposed Urban Renewal Agency budget for FY22. So with that, I will turn it over to our city staffers, Amanda and Mauricio.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Noble Flannery, and I am the Interim Co-Director for Community Development. Today, you'll hear from myself and Mauricio Badalico, Senior Financial Analyst, and Will Dowdy, my fellow Co-Director, about urban renewal. We'll start with an overview of what urban renewal is, its purpose, where the districts are located. We'll dive into some of the basics about how urban renewal works and take a look at the FY22 budget. We'll do a tiny review of past projects and talk about current projects. And after our presentation, we'll be happy to answer your questions. So urban renewal, it's sometimes in the news, it's got its own section in the budget and its own annual financial report, but what is it? Simply put, urban renewal is a tool used by council, which is why we have this tool belt here. We're looking forward to updating this picture with one that includes Councilors Keating and Councilor Groves, just as soon as you're all together in person. Urban renewal is a tool to stimulate economic prosperity in specific areas of the community in compliance with state statute. From this vacant building into this vibrant awesomeness. There are places in our city where the complexity of improvement is higher, but the community benefit is also bigger. Both of our urban renewal districts are located in the downtown area, and it's because downtown has a competitive disadvantage for the reasons you see here. In the interest of time, I won't go through them. They range from site conditions to market conditions and everything in between. Urban renewal is a tool to help us get past those obstacles and achieve that transformation. So there are two urban renewal districts, the downtown and the riverfront. The current boundary here for the downtown district is outlined in yellow. The library is near the southern border and the Holt Center is located at the north side of the district. The downtown district was first established in 1968. And the last substantial amendment was in 2016 to make 4 projects eligible. This is the Riverfront District. It covers the area north of Franklin Boulevard to the river, over to Pearl Street, where it meets up with the downtown district. It was created in 1985, and the last substantial amendment to the plan was in 2004 to extend the district life and allow for future projects. I'll hand it over to Maurizio.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'm going to review a few urban renewal basics and the FY22 proposed budget. Many of you have heard us present URA 101 in the past, so I'll keep it lighter on the details tonight. Although I get really excited talking about tax increment financing, I'm sure most of you would be more excited to hear the updates on the current URA projects that Will is going to discuss a little bit later. So like Amanda said, we know this picture is outdated, but the key point is that City Council wears two hats, one as the Urban Renewal Agency Board and one as City Council. City Council creates and amends urban renewal districts while the agency board governs them. The primary source of revenue for urban renewal is tax increment revenue. This is not an additional tax, but rather a redistribution of taxes from overlapping taxing jurisdictions to the urban renewal district. And each district has a plan that determines how much tax increment is allowed to be spent and what are the acceptable activities and projects in each district. So let's review some key points about tax increment revenue. As I previously mentioned, urban renewal is not an additional tax. The total tax amount paid by property owners does not change because of urban renewal. What does change is the split between the overlapping taxing jurisdictions who receive that revenue. Tax increment revenue is collected from across the city from properties located both inside and outside of the urban renewal districts. This is due to a process performed by the Lane County tax assessor called the division of tax. The result of the division of tax is that all property tax bills in the city contain line items for urban renewal, one for downtown and one for Riverfront. There's no difference between the taxes paid by taxpayers inside of a district versus outside of a district. And because of the state school funding formula and our complex property tax system, School District 4J actually benefits financially as a result of urban renewal. So aside from tax increment revenue, there are other revenue sources for the Urban Renewal Agency. Each district has a loan program, and loan repayments are returned to the loan pool and subsequently loaned out for new projects. Interest income is generated based on cash balances in the urban renewal funds. Rental income is received when agency-owned property is leased to third parties, and any sale of agency-owned property generates additional district revenue. Maximum indebtedness is a cumulative spending cap for property tax expenditures over a period of time. Expenditures of program revenue, which come from non-property tax sources, are not included in the spending limit. So the downtown district's limit was set in 1998 at originally at $33 million. Subsequent increases in 2010 and 2016 bring us to the current cumulative total of $66 million. The most recent downtown plan amendment approved at the end of 2020 did not increase the spending limit. And in the Riverfront District, the spending limit was set at $34.8 million in 2004 and remains at that level today. The agency's primary goal is to promote redevelopment within the districts. In doing so, funds are spent amongst the following activities. Capital projects include public space improvements and infrastructure enhancements. Loan disbursements include funding of the loan programs to business and property owners in order to further encourage redevelopment in the districts. And project delivery administration includes the various activities you see here. The agency does not have employees, and thus these activities are carried out by city staff, and the city is fully reimbursed by the agency for these costs. The amount of project delivery administration included in the budget ratchets up and down from year to year, depending on the amount of activity occurring in each district. And this graphic shows all the groups that participate in urban renewal governance. I won't read them all, but as you can see, there are many entities involved. So now that we've covered the basics, let's review the FY22 proposed urban renewal agency budget. The total budget for both districts is $16.8 million, although the net expenditure budget is $13.9 million after excluding interfund transfers. These interfund transfers are typically needed to move tax increment revenue from the receiving fund in each district to the other funds within the same district. Although interfund transfers of program revenue can also be used. It's important to note these figures do not include capital budget authority previously approved. Similar to all capital projects, unspent capital funding will be estimated through the capital carryover process and will be included in the adopted budget. So now let's take a closer look at the budget details for each of the funds shown on this chart. So let's start with the downtown district. The white arrows in the middle there indicate transfers from the Downtown Debt Service Fund to the other district funds in order to cover eligible plan expenses with tax increment revenue. You will notice that the tax increment revenue is not enough to fully fund the additional farmers market expense as approved by the agency board. This means the district will borrow money in FY22 and pay it back with future tax increment revenue. This is typical for large urban renewal projects to meet cash flow needs. The borrowing specifics will come back to the agency board for approval at a later date as the details and the timing are worked out. I'd also like to point out that the loan pool for the downtown loan program is made up of program revenue from non-property tax sources. Although all available program revenue is budgeted for the loan pool, actual loan activity may vary. So now let's move on to the Riverfront District. There are no arrows on this slide because no interfund transfers are budgeted in the Riverfront District in FY22. You may recall that the city issued $12 million in bonds to provide funding for downtown Riverfront capital expenses. Through an intergovernmental agreement, the agency reimburses the city for debt service on these bonds using tax increment revenue. And in addition to the proposed capital expenditures shown here, as I mentioned earlier, any unused Riverfront Capital Budget Authority that was previously approved will also be included in the adopted budget. And you may notice that the Riverfront Program Revenue Fund is not shown here, and that's because there are no expenditures included in the FY22 proposed budget. Program revenue from this fund was transferred to support capital projects in FY21 and will be replenished with future land sale revenue. And before I turn it back to Amanda, I just wanted to provide a couple of resources for additional information. So the budget documents, especially the adopted budget document, is a great resource for additional information about urban renewal. And another great resource is the urban renewal section of the city's website, where you can find the district plans, their accompanying reports, and project-related information.
Okay, so as I said earlier, urban renewal is a tool to stimulate economic prosperity downtown. When you read through any city plan or policy document, downtown plays a large part due to its central role in multiple aspects of our community. Because downtown has such an impact on the implementation of these policies, urban renewal becomes about much more than just downtown. It's a way to invest in the broader community goals and move the needle in the right direction. Council established a plan for each urban renewal district as well that provides more specific direction on the types of projects for each district. As Mauricio said, the agency board can use urban renewal funds on items in the urban renewal plans. The project activities generally have led to the 5 types of projects you see here. And to bring these activities to life, I'll provide some very quick examples. Transforming this industrial use on 8th Avenue into the Wayne Morris Federal Courthouse and just east down 8th, the Northwest Community Credit Union headquarters. The Downtown Library, the Mary Spildy Center on 10th Avenue, the Broadway Commerce Center, and last but not least, the Woolworth Building. Those are just a handful of the great projects Council as the agency board has contributed to with urban renewal. I'll hand it over to Will.
Hello. I'm Will Dowdy, and I get to provide an update for you on the current projects of the 2 urban renewal districts. Beginning with downtown. As you know, City Council amended the urban renewal plan in 2016, which made 4 projects eligible for the agency board to use urban renewal funds on. That's the downtown fiber network, the farmers market, park blocks and open space, and 1059 Willamette Street. Let's start underground. The downtown fiber project has been a collaboration between the agency and city, EWEB, LCOG, and the Technology Association of Oregon. The infrastructure investments have created a publicly owned fiber network in the downtown. The high-speed, low-cost internet on these new fiber lines have led to over 100 more jobs in Eugene, attracting new companies and allowing homegrown companies to grow and thrive. And the expanded interconnect facility has improved internet capacity at 4J and Springfield schools, as well as serving as a foundation for expansion of the broadband system looking forward. The downtown fiber project is on track to be completed by the end of the fiscal year. The city is now scoping a project, not an urban renewal project, but another project that would create a blueprint for expanding the fiber network to other neighborhoods. The farmers market project is now underway as well. This project begins with restoring a piece of the civic landscape, the recovery of the Northwest Park Block. The landmark on this park block will be a new pavilion, a community venue, and home to the Lane County Farmers Market. Going back to 2010, City Council began prioritizing improvements to help the farmers market expand. More space for more vendors to sell on more days of the year. Learning from the architectural wisdom of greenhouses, structures designed to extend the growing season, the new pavilion will give access to people in Eugene and the broader region to more locally grown and produced food, and give these farmers and producers a better direct-to-customer experience for growing their businesses. This week, the butterfly lot has been closed and demolition will proceed this month. The project will be completed in the winter, and next year, the farmers market will have a new home that is a testament to the important role that local food plays in our community. Closely connected with the work on the farmers market is the comprehensive design for the entire park blocks. The first phase of this focuses on the streets adjacent to the farmers market. West Park, shown in purple, and 8th Avenue, which will be part of a larger public works project, shown here in blue. Also in this phase is a freestanding restroom that is scheduled to be completed later this summer. That's the yellow circle on the bottom left. Last year, the agency board directed staff to reserve funds for other open space improvement in the district. Since then, staff has been scoping a project for the Willamette connection between 6th and 7th Avenues, which is what you may think of as the space between the Halt Center and the Graduate Hotel and Eugene Conference Center. It's an opportunity to increase connectivity between the downtown core and the commercial areas on 5th Avenue, from the Whitaker all the way down to the riverfront. Per the urban renewal plan, staff will bring scoping on any potential projects to an agency board work session and public hearing, and this project should be ready for review in the coming months. Lastly, 1059 Willamette is a redevelopment project of the former LCC Downtown Center, which has been vacant since 2013. Last year, the city acquired this property with federal community development block grant funds, following council's direction to pilot an innovative type of development, a mixed income housing project. The city released an RFP in November for a development team that could turn this into a new apartment building with a combination of market rate housing and units affordable to households with incomes of 80% area median income or less. This project would be unique for its blending of economic brackets and for targeting a different income threshold than other affordable housing options, while also achieving a long-standing downtown goal of bringing an active ground floor and lots of positive energy to this block. As part of the RFP, council made $1.1 million available to support the project, including $700,000 of urban renewal funds. We received one proposal for a 6-story, $30 million building with 129 units. Our evaluation committee spoke in favor of the proposing team's qualifications and vision, and staff conducted a public online survey that had over 300 responses. Staff will bring the proposal to council on June 9th for council to decide whether to move forward with this proposed project. I'm going to switch over now to a discussion of the Riverfront District and the downtown Riverfront site, where the river meets the city and where the city meets the river. The vision isn't going to be anything new for you. In fact, you need to go back to a budget committee meeting in the 1980s to find a time when the idea of redeveloping this industrial site was a brand new idea. What has changed, though, in the 2 years since we've discussed this project with this group is what the site well, it's what the site looks like. And this is what it looked like at that time. At the forefront of the work since then has been the new downtown Riverfront Park. And that's rather fitting. And I'm going to show a video here. And you can see the current site, the site, and mostly a lot of the park land. So it's fitting that the downtown Riverfront Park has been at the forefront of the work, since this park will be at the center of the riverfront experience. The first phase is the linear 3-acre park along the water. The urban renewal investment has resulted in riparian enhancement and new riverbanks, as well as a wider, safer, and all-around better multimodal path that connects to the rest of our riverbank path system. Our parks and open space staff and their contractors will complete the park later this summer. The second phase is what we're calling the Riverfront Plaza, 1 acre at the heart of the neighborhood that will be a space for gathering, culture, and play. Together, the park and the plaza will be a layered landscape, one that moves from more urban, on the redevelopment side, down toward natural and soft areas along the river, with pedestrian paths woven through the riverbank. The plaza design will take place this fall, and staff is scheduling a follow-up work session for the agency board to discuss the appropriate budget. Hopefully none of you are seasick. That's one of the hazards of these kinds of videos. To reach the park, one must have streets and sidewalks, at least for those not traveling along the river. A team from Public Works Engineering has been busy making sure that there will be safe and easy access for all by the time the park opens this year. The first phase of infrastructure is the northern half of the site, centering around the extension of 5th Avenue from a new rail crossing at High Street to an overlook at the river. The second phase connects to the south, and you can see that on the right side of the screen. It runs past the steam plant and meets a new rail crossing at 8th and Hilliard. Phase 2 is on track to be completed by the end of the calendar year. Parks and streets are the public space of this city, and they depend on high quality urban buildings to make them exceptional. The Urban Renewal Agency has invested in the park and the streets, and for the last few years, we've been working with Atkins Dame Inc., formerly Williams and Dame, who will bring the remaining half of the site to life. Atkins Dame will begin construction on the first 2 buildings, 200 or more units, later this year. Following these, they will add retail and restaurants and hundreds of more housing units, providing a backdrop to the park and plaza and connecting to the existing city blocks to the north and west. Concurrent with and complementary to the work of Atkins Dame, the city will begin the development of an affordable housing component to this project. The agency board has prioritized the inclusion of 75 housing units affordable to households at 60% area median income, and these will be built at 4th and Mill. Staff is exploring funding options for this and will bring these to the agency board at the same time the plaza is discussed. There's one last project to discuss, one that has caught the eye and imagination of hundreds of thousands of people. The steam plant is the signature building of this site. It anchors the south end of the park. It's a reminder of the industrial heritage of the site, and it's a symbol of energy, innovation, and hard work. In 2018, the agency held a competitive request for qualifications process to find a team that could transform this historic structure into a hub and community space. This is no small feat, and to give you a sense of the technical challenge of the project, I'll point out that the appraised value of the property is negative $8 million. In 2019, the agency board decided to move forward with the development team led by Mark Mixis and Mark Frohnmeyer for the redevelopment of the steam plant. They proposed to adaptively redevelop the structure into a mixed-use building with commercial, food, drink, art, and performance space on the ground floor. The upper area would have uses that provide the financial foundation to make the project viable, and the team is currently looking at a range of options, including housing, hospitality, office, whatever can work in the current economy. Given the nature of the building and the work needed to transform it into a mixed-use building, the team anticipates they'll need assistance from the agency to complete the project. We've been working with them to negotiate deal points, which will be brought back to the agency board, currently scheduled for a week from today, May 19th. The deal points the agency board will be considering would earmark about $1.5 to $2 million of urban renewal funds to pay for SDCs, permits, and asbestos abatement. And that's the end. Thank you for your attention as we share this work of the agency. Even for those of us who work on the agency projects every day, we don't spend a lot of time thinking about them as an ensemble, and it's quite a list. Urban Renewal is investing in our agricultural economy so that people who tend the soil with their hands can sell fresh food face to face. It's also investing in our virtual economy so that our entrepreneurs in our classrooms can transmit information across the world on beams of light. On top of that are the restoration of an old industrial building and a much, much older riverbank, and places for people to gather, eat, and play, and places for people to live. So we've covered a lot of ground in the different aspects of this presentation, and we're available for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda, Maurizio, and Will. That was an excellent presentation. I really appreciated it. And we have, as they said, an opportunity to ask some questions. If anyone has any, we certainly have time. So please raise your virtual hand, committee members, if any of you have any questions of staff on the Urban Renewal Agency. Anyone at all? I think I see Councillor Evans raising your hand. Take it away.
I'm going to focus on the STEAM plan. Given the current uncertainty around what the funding strategy is going to be around that, can you give some more clarity in terms of how much money that the Urban Renewal District is going to have to put in to make that project viable?
Sure. It's something that we will confirm in the deal points. But right now, the draft deal points that we've negotiated with the development team would be for the agency to contribute. It would just be the cost for those three items. And the what's unknown at this point is the extent of what the SDCs and permit fees would be, because that changes with depending on the use. But it's permit fees and SDCs, and it's the asbestos abatement. So we expect that the permit fees and SDCs are in the $1 million to $1.5 million range. The asbestos abatements of also about $500,000. So that's where we came up with the $1.5 to $2 million.
And I know you don't have a crystal ball, but do you expect a second ask from the developers for more public funds to support the project?
No, we don't.
Or this is a single one-time deal?
Yes, that's the way we're structuring this deal, is that it would be a single ask. That's one of the things that they are working on as part of their due diligence, is to tighten up the details. But when we've worked through all of these deal points with them, this has been the item that they've asked for.
And the last question is, have they secured their private funding to make sure that that's comparable with the public investment?
I don't know the answer to that. Amanda, do you? And if not, we can come back with that information next week.
That would be something
we're having a full work session on this topic.
That would be something they would do during their due diligence period, once we've signed an agreement with them.
Okay. Got it.
Do you have any other questions from the committee? I am not seeing any, so I think we can go ahead and move on. Thank you so much again for that presentation. I really appreciated it. And that brings us next on our agenda to the city manager, who wanted to give us another update today.
Yeah, I think after we met a couple of weeks ago, I said I would come back after we had a chance to listen to some of your comments and talk about kind of what does this journey look like, since it's a little bit different than last year. So I have a trick here because I only have 3 slides, but one of them has a lot of information in it. So it's kind of a trick slide. And I'm just going to say, as I was building it, I thought, I'm sure taking this mountain metaphor a long way here, but I don't like to mix metaphors in the middle of something. So if somebody wants to give me a challenge for FY23 to switch it to sailing or something else, I'm happy to do that. But I want to start off by just talking about the strong financial leadership we've had at the city. And I think, you know, you and those that came before you are all a part of that. But that strong financial stewardship has allowed us to climb through a lot of really difficult times, you know, and in my career, I can think back to the, you know, original property tax caps that happened pretty much right after I got hired, through the recession, and now through a pandemic. And I have a lot of gratitude for that. You know, just like when you're climbing, you know, you have to have an anchor to stay really safe. And I think our general fund reserves has been that anchor for us over the years. And it was that anchor that allowed us to take some risks and do bridge funding and start some of those community safety initiatives early, because we had a lot of confidence in our financial structure. None of us could have anticipated that we'd be in the middle of a pandemic or that would be coming. And so we're still safe and stable, but I would say we're pretty thin, and that raises some concerns for me as we go forward. So as I shared before with you, every year I talk about sort of the perfect rhythm of a year and how things would normally flow, to think about what is our community input and feedback, and what are council's goals, and kind of that strategic planning process that kind of feeds into our budget preparation. And, you know, most years, I think you would think that like 85% of that would be known as we're kind of going into the development. And then some years things have been, and I over my career, there's sometimes where it's just not like that and you have to revisit it. So FY22 is definitely one of those years that I think it's really clear we're going to be on a journey together for a bit. And I just want to put a plug in here for FY23, because as much as we're going to focus in on some of the challenges for this year, I think it's really important that we as a team are also thinking big picture and really thinking about how we're planning and protecting for next year and those years beyond. We do have a number of unfunded ongoing needs that aren't built in. They're built in for this year, but they're not built in for next year. And so we still have some challenges ahead of us. So here's my plug for FY23. Some of the things that have come up, and I just want to kind of talk about where they fit on this journey. The community safety initiative. So there's a lot of questions coming into this budget season and also during it, and actually during your comment tonight about what does it mean and when will funding change? Is it going to change? Can we do this? Can we do that? As you know, this past Monday night, Council had a work session that was a full information session on what we learned through the community engagement process about the community safety initiative. And that was about as far as we could go, was sort of deep into that report. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it was really, really well done report. I anticipate that there'll be a second work session to kind of dive into more detail on the funding, what we're really experiencing, what is our current implementation. And then I think we'll be doing some adjustments and adaptations, not just on the 17th, not just at that second work session, but ongoing as we reach FY23. And I think even beyond that, I think as Laura pointed out in that meeting, you know, the community safety initiative was set up to fund a handful of buckets. It was prevention, homelessness, fire and EMS, municipal court, and police. And there's a proportionality to that can shift and change, but it really needs to stay in those buckets. And I think understanding where are we at now, what is the proportionality now, what are we really anticipating as we're starting to receive the payroll tax. Everything to this date has been done on bridge loans. The other topic of discussion is the ad hoc committee on police policy. I'm getting some similar questions about how does this policy work actually start to feed into our budget process. So similar, this coming Monday night, so May 17th, Council will have another one of those deep informational sessions where they're going to hear from staff about what's in the report. The report is out, it's very thorough, there's a lot in it, and they'll take that information in, and just like with the CSI, I anticipate we're going to have a number of work sessions coming out of that will start to help us frame what actions we're going to be taking. And it's really going to take some analysis of that work and what those next steps are to understand how that might or might not weave into the budget. It's really difficult to predict that right now. Whereas the Community Safety Initiative is a funding item where we know that, what the funding issues are. There's the policy issues, some of them aren't. And so we'll just have to see how that work goes. And it's a longer term. That's going to go beyond FY23. It's a transformation, and that takes some time. There's also sort of those ongoing wins that are happening. So I just want to think about that because I think it's a little bit different than in most years. So I'm going to talk about the ARPA next, but there's going to be more funding opportunities and possibilities. So, we're talking about the direct allocation of the ARPA funds. There's also a number of other different funding opportunities within that act. There's also been some state opportunities that weren't previously available. And there's just a number of things that are happening that I think are going to keep popping up that are going to have direct impacts on our budget and a need to meet and talk about how you want to do that and how we want to do the supplemental budgets. We're also, I meant to do that. We're also going to continue to monitor. So we're still monitoring revenues. We're going to be monitoring payroll. We're monitoring, what is going to be the SIL, all of the things that we talked about, we're constantly doing, and we may end up having to make some adjustments along the way as we kind of continue working through this pandemic. And then there's always, regulatory operational things that happen. So these are things we're adjusting for all the time. And of course, an important one is council will finalize their goals in June, and that will help kind of set the stage for the next item, which is the ARPA funds, which are here somewhere. And, as you know, I don't have a ton of knowledge about when those funds are going to hit. I thought maybe they were going to actually be here before we had this meeting, and it's possible they could have shown up in this magical way they're supposed to show up while we're meeting, or maybe right before the meeting. But what we're expecting is that those will eventually be here in May, and they will come with some guidelines, either with or within, I've heard, a week, that will help us understand what and how we can utilize those dollars, and will help finalize, can we really plan for those through the end of calendar year 2024. We're doing some financial analysis right now that is looking at what are all the revenue losses we've had and what are we predicting over the next couple of years. How long are we going to be in this trough? And when we wrap that up, we'll be looking for some policy direction from the city council on what those priority areas might be, priority buckets where we want to really consider how we use those funds. And just a reminder that, it could be substantial, and it's also one time and has some time limitations to it. So it's not going to solve our ongoing needs that I talked about when I was pointing to FY23. So what does that mean for you as a budget committee this year? I know it's a little bit complicated, and it looks like some of you may not have made you're just behind. You're just right behind my screen. You didn't fall off. But it's just a reminder that we're on a journey together. This is going to be ongoing. As you can see from all the things I've put on here, there's really only one check mark, which is we did the CSI on Monday. So there's a lot happening, and not all of this is going to be resolved before you are making your recommendations to the city council. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, so you're going to spend some time with us, and I looked back over some minutes from 2008, 2009, 2010. In some of those years, we met with some frequency to kind of give updates and keep people engaged. And so that's how I anticipate this will continue to play out. And so what are some options for you? Last week, there was a lot of discussion. I'm going to focus on one item, which is the fire engine. So there was a lot of discussion about that shift and what could be done, and could ARPA money be used for that, or how would you add that back? And my recommendation is that if there's something like the engine company that you want to add back, that the committee consider putting forward a motion that recommends to the city council that they prioritize that return of service as they're going through that bucket. And that way, you know, between now and when we get those funds and the guidelines, that'll just give us a little bit of time to adapt and adjust, and could be a really effective way of achieving what it is you want to do. Last slide. I say some of that because I just think it's really important to remember that you and those that have come before you are an important piece of this hardware that has kept us safe and has kept that rock that has allowed us to weather these storms. I think, you know, I feel good about where we're heading. And I think that, you know, where I will start to have concerns is if we can't wait for that discussion and to restore the things you might want to restore, and that we start dipping into reserves, because I think that's going to be a really challenging conversation to have our reserves dip even lower. So I just wanted to provide that so you understand kind of the journey and some of those timelines and place marks. And I will stop sharing there. I can answer any questions, or you can talk about it during your deliberations.
We're far enough ahead of schedule that if anyone has any particularly specific questions tied to what we just heard, I would take hands now. And I see Ryan.
I just go for it.
Go for it.
Sorry, I've been having horrible internet issues all evening, so I'm sorry if I suddenly drop. From my understanding, the Treasury Department did release guidance on uses of ARPA funds on the 10th, the morning of the 10th. So we should have that final guidance available now. And it seems from that personnel costs or reductions are an eligible expense, even retroactively. So I'm sure you're already thinking about this, but it would help me just to get a feel for what those reductions have been in terms of personnel.
So last year, the only reductions that are set were what we did last year. And last year we did a $750,000 ongoing savings that wasn't about personnel. It was mostly about materials and supplies, because absent the pandemic, we still have some structural issues we're trying to solve. Most of our personnel impacts last year were related to positions that we didn't hire. So we weren't running recreation programs, so we didn't hire some of those recreation staff that we normally would have. I think all the rest of our employees, and so it's a similar thing with the stagehands, and some of that work that happens on the stage is, some of those are city employees, some of them aren't. They're working through the IATSE union. So I'm sure there were some impacts there that were similar, but in terms of direct city impacts, we've been able to weather it because of that rock that we counted on. This year we have some reductions proposed to kind of hit that $4.5 million target. And so as we go, and importantly, because we know this is going to go on for a number of years and there's a lot of service needs, I feel like it's really important for us to understand kind of where we're at financially and how we're going to weather the next 4 years before we start deciding, you know, for sure it's going to go here or there. And so we'll wrap that up. Thanks for your tip on the guidance. I didn't know that and I haven't seen it. So we'll wrap all that work up to prepare for that, to that discussion that says, here's, you know, I may give a proposal about here's some just general buckets that I think should be priorities. And then we can kind of go from there. And thanks, Ryan.
It just helps that my day job is I work for a state legislator. So I saw it come through on that end. So hope that helps.
Yeah.
And I do see Councillor Groves, your hand up as well. And then I think Eliza also just signals she'll go after you.
Thank you, Chair. Sarah, you kind of answered partially what I was going to ask. Maybe you don't have a specific recommendation list now for how some of that money might be spent in restoring as a bridge to get us 2 years down the road. But I would be very interested in hearing some of your specific thoughts as the city manager. And I don't know you're prepared to talk about some of that now, or if that's something that you would bring back to us at a future meeting. But I think that that would be helpful to the process from your standpoint.
Okay, so I think we're talking about maybe two different things. So I've been sort of looking to the budget committee to give some sort of a feedback on these are the things. It would be hard to recommend fully restoring everything without having a lot more analysis, because the money's going to go faster than I think people realize it's going to go. I heard pretty loud and clear in the last meeting that there was an interest in potentially adding back the engine company. And so what I was recommending is if there's things like that the committee feels really strongly about wanting to restore, then if you want to put forward a motion saying, hey, City Council, we want you to prioritize that's something I could definitely support.
And we're rotating between people who raise physical and virtual hands, but Eliza, you'll be followed by Councilor Zelenka, and I also see Catherine, then you threw your hand up as well.
I am sure that this is going to be different for different items that are on this reduction list, but getting a sense of when those specific reductions would start having impacts, I think would be very helpful. Because, when you're looking at this, you're seeing sort of a materials and service savings, and some of those, okay, we don't know yet whether we're going to have money for that. We'll see it, maybe we can figure that out in August and we can just buy the thing in August instead of in June. There are other of these, you look at the staffing costs and the staffing reductions, you look at the fire engine. Once you've made those shifts and the money's gone away, and then you reinstate it, it has a very different impact, right? Because if we've said, like, I only see one specific, okay, it looks like someone's actually getting laid off in here, and once we've laid off that human, that's a very different impact than just waiting to buy something. And so I feel like having a sense of which of these, like, when do the actual, like, on the ground changes happen as a result of these reductions in the budget. And I'm sure some of them have already happened. You talk about the animal services being related to the reduction in people seeking animal services, right? You need to buy less supplies for that. So.
Yeah, so really good point. I think that we did try to prioritize things that would have the least amount of impact on the community. And so a couple of the things that you mentioned, so for example, I'll stick to the fire engine. That is not we weren't planning on laying anybody off as part of that. It's a shift in how that service happens, and it was a 2-year shift. So it was really one-time dollars 2 times that doesn't have to, if we're starting to get, if we get the feeling and you make that recommendation, and I'll be anticipating that council would add that back, we will slow roll to make sure that we're not, making lasting impacts. We were keeping the engine, we're keeping, the employees, we're just redeploying them in a different way. So that's one. I see your point about the materials and supplies. I'm just going to say again, and this may not be totally popular, but we are, like, the pandemic's happening. We have some one-time dollars. We'll use those to, restore some of our rock, and we'll also be using those to provide some of the services that are really critical right now. It's still in this pandemic, but the other things we're planning for are longer term structural things like, how are we going to fund downtown ongoing? How are we going to fund homelessness ongoing? My budget doesn't include funding for the navigation center operations. So we're still at a core trying to figure out structurally how to manage the ongoing. So I couldn't, it would be hard to recommend just restoring everything. It would have to be pretty selective, and I would be encouraging people to limit that.
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka and then Catherine.
City manager, do we know what's the approximate ARPA funds that we're going to get?
Yeah, so we're slated to get, the estimate was 35.5 million. And I think initially it was going to come in one payment and then it was two. So I'm not certain yet how that is going to play. And if there's somebody on this call that has more certainty, they're willing to jump in, they can.
Yeah, I liked your slide with all the different buckets of issues that we're dealing with. The CSI and the ad hoc committee police policy. We're setting up and starting different processes for each of those to see how those would be, what kind of modifications those are going to result in the way that the city does business and what our budget will be. Some will have budget impacts and some will not. Some are policy, and some are shifting things around. So that's not a net impact. It could be just a different allocation. As far as the ARPA funds, this is unfortunate timing. It'd be perfect if they had come a month ago or 2 months ago when we were putting together the budget, and then we would have been able to have that be incorporated. But alas, that's not what happened. On page 17 of the budget is the proposed general fund budget reduction strategies and it has the list of $4.6 million worth of reduction strategies that are in here. Last meeting we talked, or cuts that we're making, in the previous page, 15 is the investments that we made, including thank you for the climate change positions. So last time we talked about maybe having, because of the timing of all of this, having a process where the budget committee approves the budget, but then because of the amount of money that we're getting through ARPA, we could then prioritize what would be the add backs in priority order. For instance, I would like to see the fire engine be the top priority. Then we can maybe come up with a process for the budget committee, then go down the list here and say, okay, if we were going to restore these things, which would be second, which would be third, which would be fourth, and I think that would be very helpful given the timing of things to make the budget meet our legal obligations, which is to have a balanced budget and also deal with the timing issues of the ARPA funds. I'm curious what other people think about that as a potential process for how we proceed with this budget. And then again, the CSI and the ad hoc committee report is a different process that we'll deal with at a different time and not during this budget process.
I see Twyla turned her light on, and so I'm gonna let you go first. I have something to say too.
Okay, I was just gonna respond to the question about the timing of funds. So we learned this week that we will receive the funding in 2 installments. The first half will come this May, and the second half will come 12 months later, so next May. And we did receive guidance, but it's a very lengthy document. It's interim guidance. It may change. We learned that with the CARES funding, that the guidance changed over time. So staff are diving in to understand the guidance and work with folks to understand and get advice on any gray areas as far as interpretation of the rule.
Because there's no such thing as no strings attached money.
Yeah,
we have to follow.
So, I think, what I was imagining was that what we would do is when we get the funds in and we complete the financial picture analysis, council has an opportunity to talk about, here's how we want to think about prioritizing those funds. Then we could come back with some sort of supplemental budget action because I don't know if we're going to have time to get all of that done before this needs to be ready to be adopted, that we would come back with some supplemental budget action that could start to allocate some of those dollars what I was anticipating was if there's a couple of things that are just super high priority that and you want to recommend to the council, then we'll just keep that in mind as we're going through this process to kind of address what Eliza was pointing out, which is like, there's some timing and communication and that happens. So for example, if we know that that's going to be a priority, we won't be moving fast to adjust to a CRU, right? We won't do that work. We'll know we're probably going to be restoring the engine. It would be hard for me so if there's a couple of those things, that's great. If you said, hey, we've got all this ARPA money, how would you have done the budget? I think there could be a number of things in here that I would still have recommended this year, even given the ARPA funds, because I just don't know the financial analysis piece yet. So it makes it a little harder. If you go through and you line them all up to restore them, that's a big assumption that we're going to restore them all. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and the fact that some of these things are ongoing, where the deficit doesn't go away if we restore the fund, that just shows up the next year. So we have to be thoughtful about how we do that. We can't just take one-time money and plug the holes, and then punt it to the next budget committee. That doesn't make much sense to me.
Right, and so the engine makes sense in this case because it was already proposed as a 2-year plan, and it's one-time money for one-time thing. So that I could see that.
Right, yeah, thanks.
All right, Catherine, and then since Councilor Semple has not had a first round yet, I'll check in with you next, and then I do see your hand as well, Councilor Evans, for a last little tidbit, and then maybe we'll go on our break at that point.
Thank you. One of my questions was about the amount, so we got that. I also wanted to clarify the kind of the deadline, whether it's end of fiscal year 23 or federal year in 23, kind of what the time frame is for when the money needs to be used by.
I believe it's December 2024.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And then I think I sort of like the idea of having sort of more like a processy thing, I don't know if it's ranking or what that looks like, but kind of something. And I think also in whatever that looks like, trying to have some space for things that are also outside of just the reduction list, so that if there are other things that maybe are more just immediate term priorities that aren't going to be ongoing things or something like that, that can be part of that conversation. I have no specific examples of what that might be, but just kind of wanting to maybe think about it so that we're not it's not that this is the list that we would be doing that with only. That's all.
Thank you. Councilor Semple.
Thank you. I want to be very careful about making a list of what we're going to reestablish. We're in really uncertain times, and we've already figured out what things, we think we can stay upright and maybe wait on, but we don't know what the opportunities are going to be. And this is one-time money for a one-time situation. And we know that we need to work really hard on sheltering the unhoused and for getting some more houses and for getting jobs. So I feel that this recovery money, we might be very cautious about spending it on things that we already think we might wait to spend, get other funding for. So I just want to put a caution about getting too deep into what you want to reestablish, and an openness to things that we don't know yet. And plus, if you rank them, things are going to shift. So we have to re-rank them. Just some caution and some openness. Thank you.
Councilor Evans.
I,
I think my question was answered in response to Catherine's query about when we have to have the money spent. Do you, in addition to that, do we have any idea of what the strings or the stipulations may be around using the money over that period? Or, how do we, what are the feds going to tell us what to do, kind of sort of, that thing is. And my dog said she had her paw up before Alan, so.
Twyla, I'll just give that. So we're going through that, I guess, that released guidance now. What we heard early on was that it would be kind of these basic buckets of responding to, and it's a little bit vague, but responding to COVID-19 impacts and then addressing, including economic impacts. So it's still, direct response to the pandemic, costs associated with that. The good thing that was in it was it allows us to replace revenue losses. And so that's part of the analysis we're doing, is not just looking back at what we anticipate, what we did lose, but also what we're anticipating through the end of 2024, because certain funds are really heavily impacted and I don't think they'll be back out of it and by the end of 2024. So we're trying to make sure that we're not creating, that we're being responsible financially. Critical infrastructure investments, water, sewer, broadband, things like that. There'll also be potentially another federal act that also helps with that. And then there was some language in there around premium pay for essential workers. And that's some of those are the things we're looking for. More guidance and whether they change or not, or they put more rules on it, or that's we're still waiting for that.
And I think the last thing, Sarah, is could we use that money for projects that are not related to our losses in COVID? Are they going to be restricted to, our COVID? So for instance, if we have a project that's on the plate now that we have not identified funding for, would some of that money be allowed to be used for that project or projects?
I'm not sure yet about this allocation of funding, but we've had a number of opportunities to put in project requests through other buckets than this direct allocation. And that's part of the analysis that I think is really important, because to the extent we can fund as much as possible outside of the direct allocation and protect that, like let's really spread and leverage these things. So for example, one of the state asks was for the bike bridge, the Santa Clara bike bridge. We recently, we're working on something right now around the, we're working on a couple of things and I'm drawing a blank on the specifics, but I know we're making an ask around Golden Gardens. So there's a number of things out there that we're asking for outside of that direct allocation. And those, if you have ideas of things that you want us to be thinking about, we should certainly be getting those from you too.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I see your hand, Ryan. Let's go one real quick second round.
Thank you, and I can be really fast. I know we want to go on break. I think this doesn't necessarily need to be stated, but we do need to be careful to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? And instead of looking at all of this in the context of, can we not spend this right now? I think we should flip that and have the perspective, what can we get done immediately or in the near future? Because people are really hurting, right? The pandemic is right now. The crisis is right now. The longer we wait, the more harm is caused, right? So there is obviously a place for caution. There's a place to wait and see what can be leveraged, but there are also things that do have one-time costs that we know about, that we know are council priorities that we can do immediately. And I hope we can talk more about this. I know the guidance came out 2 days ago. There's a lot of reading to do, but I just want to put that note of urgency into the conversation too.
All right, thank you so much. And with that, let's take 10 minutes. It's 7:07. So I'll bring us back in at 7:17 for our scheduled deliberations. Hope you got a good chance to stretch your legs, clear your mind a little after all the thinking before we start talking. So our next schedule, we're going to slide into our deliberation. But first, City Manager Maderi just wanted another quick minute or two to share a few thoughts that came to her during the break.
Yeah, I thank you, Ty. I appreciate it. And I, you know, what I have tried to present with this ARPA funding is that we have some time. And I really appreciated Ryan's comment about some things just can't wait, and totally get that. Part of my concern and why I've said is like, we need to complete our analysis and do this is because some of our preliminary analysis is not small. So for example, you know, I don't have the final data. I'm just getting early information that by June of this year, we could potentially be $13 million in the hole on our existing current revenue budgets. We didn't build any of that into this budget. We didn't build in an automatic backfilling if cultural services continued not to bring in revenue or parking continued, because our philosophy was we need to be continuously trying to innovate and solve this problem and contain our costs. And when we get to the end of the fiscal year, we'll true that up because by law we have to. So it's a big number, and I haven't wanted to build up a whole lot of, you know, big expectations around what we're going to be able to do with this funding. So that's why I've said I would be recommending a very limited backfill, and it would probably only be of like sort of one-time things. So that's where I was at, and I appreciate the conversation, and I know we have a lot of needs. I just don't want you to leave this meeting thinking we're going to have a lot of room, because I don't think there's going to be a ton of it. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So for the round robin, I got a new list. I asked city staff to re-randomize a new one for this meeting and for each subsequent meeting. This just to try to emulate a little bit more what it is like when we're in person, since we always mix up the seating arrangements and do a literal round robin when we've met in person. So trying to find a Zoom equivalent to that. So blame staff, not me, if you don't like where your order is this time, but also it'll change next time. And so we're going to give each person 3 minutes for the first round, go through everyone, and then just like last time, we'll do a second round for anyone who wants it in the same order, and then go free for all for third rounds with hand raising at that point. Do please avoid using chat for any form of side conversations. The only thing we should be seeing in chat is comments about queue orders if something gets missed. If I don't acknowledge a hand raise or anything like that. So for our first round of deliberation, we're starting with Ryan Moore, and Councillor Semple will be next.
Sorry, I had to turn my air conditioner off, which is very loud. So just responding to some of the public comment from the beginning of the meeting, I'm not a member of the Eugene Police Foundation, and it is a 501c3, so I don't believe this body has any oversight at all over the foundation. I just wanted to clarify that. There was an idea to declare the list of speakers and maybe even in the order they'll be called at the beginning. I think that's a great idea. Myself, I've been in line waiting to comment for hours and hours, like many people, and had no idea when I'd be called, and I felt stuck there, trapped, because I didn't know when it would happen. So I think that's a great idea. This may have already been answered, or it may not be answerable at this point, but so the charter locks in what sort of buckets are allowable uses for CSI funds. My question isn't about that, but how is it determined whether or not a specific project fits within or is outside of one of those buckets? Is that just a case by case? Does this make sense? Does it not make sense kind of thing?
I'm looking at that. Thank you, Christy. Christy has been way more involved in the CSI over the years than I have. So
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Ryan, thanks for the question. I'm Christy Hamm, Assistant City Manager. And a lot of the work that went into planning for what would be funded by the CSI or what was intended to be the programming at the time that we put that together a couple of years ago was really just developing a system around those off-ramps. We always knew that the implementation strategies would remain nimble as we had more information. And so there's some prescriptive things that we were planning to do, but I think as we've learned over the course of the last year, continuing to receive input into how best to move forward with those strategies makes the most sense. So there's a lot of room to think about the best strategies to implement at this point. So.
Okay. And
but
so
your question was really around how those decisions get made.
Yeah,
so
sorry.
Yeah, so what we do is we spend a lot of time not only listening to the community, we're working right now with a consultant who's helping us work to establish some pretty robust metrics that can help us evaluate the outcomes of our programs. We'll be using that, and we have a community safety initiative policy team that includes 5 executive team members, project leads, and things like that, plus a steering committee. And what we'll be doing is looking to see is how well are we doing at achieving those metrics and the outcomes and adjust accordingly. And so those programmatic changes at this point would come from the policy team based upon review of that information, and then go to the city manager, and ultimately probably end up in front of the council for discussion. So
the 2 magic words, metrics and outcomes. Thank you. Let's see. So we're hearing some talk again about neighborhood matching grant allocation formula being changed. I haven't come across that in the proposed budget.
There's no reductions. In fact, there's a $20,000 increase to kickstart the Bethel Neighborhood Planning Project.
Cool. Okay, just wanted to get that out there. And then again, it came up in public comment, or we've talked about it in the past, some sort of comprehensive review or accounting or crosswalk of homelessness services, and including things to the extent possible that touch on maybe criminalization elements. So maybe where police is involved, even where Cahoots is involved as it relates to homelessness. I think that would be hugely helpful, not only to us here, but to the community at large. Obviously, it's a top priority. And I'll yield back the rest of my time.
Thank you. Councillor Semple, followed by Councillor Zelenka.
I think it would be fantastic once we randomized the list that we made, we told people at council and here, because in the past we didn't randomize it, so you knew. And we randomized it, I think, right early, so we could announce that. I think that I was just going to pass, but that's so great. I had to say, yeah. I'm not in the foundation, and I also didn't think the neighborhoods had been cut. So I'm really thrilled that we're going to help Bethel get going, because I believe that neighborhood associations need to be bigger and more inclusive. So I certainly wouldn't want to cut anything. And just again, some caution. We're in really still pretty dire times, and we don't have as much money as we wish we did, and we don't have as much money as we think we do, and our revenue is really stressed right now. So I want to be hopeful and excited and say, yeah, we're going to do these things, but it's really the time to take a deep breath and tighten our belts while we're breathing in. So Councillor Semple's words of advice.
Thank you. Councillor Zelenka will be followed by Sean Londahl.
Yeah, the list of random people is a good idea. I wouldn't want us to be reading that list when it's 60 people long. So if we put it in the chat or someplace online so people can see it, that's probably a good way to do it, and then they can access it. I like that idea too. Yeah, I just wanted to reemphasize something that Emily just said, which is that this is uncertain times, and our budget is potentially going to have some big hits to it still. And we need to be very prudent and frugal and conservative in terms of what we add back and how we add it back and what we add back. And of course, be very cognizant of the don't use one-time monies to refund and put back ongoing things, because that just doesn't work. It just punts the can down or kicks the can down the road, punts the ball down the field, can down the road. So that's it. Thanks.
Thank you, Sean, and then Councilor Evans.
I just wanted to say I really appreciate the data that the fire chief shared with us. I think it's really helpful to understand the I think effective solution that they came up with within a constrained budget. So I know there's going to be more discussion about this, but I do appreciate that information. And that's it.
Thank you, Councilor Evans, and then Eliza Kaczynski.
I'm good for the moment, Ty. I pass it.
Thank you. After Eliza will be Councilor Ye.
So first of all, I just wanted to say, express my appreciation for the service level views that appear in the full budget, even though they don't appear in the draft budget. In particular, and Ty kind of requested we start signaling things that we are interested in. And I know there's already been some signaling around fire. But I'm looking a lot at our social services funding this year. It's very hard to pull out of the draft budget because, it's spread out among all the different departments. Unlike fire, we don't have a department for it, so it's buried in line items, sub line items. But I do know, and that that service level view from last year that you did on social services specifically was extremely helpful. That last year we budgeted just under $5 million for social services and spread throughout various departments, and it was down 15% from what we ultimately spent in fiscal year 2020. It is difficult to tell what was budgeted for this year because we don't get those service views in the draft budget, but we do know that there are some specific cuts that are outlined for that. I do feel that one of the roles of budget committee is to make sure that the priorities of council are accurately reflected in the budget. And John talked last meeting about making sure that as we navigate these difficult financial waters, we make sure that we're focused on our core city services and helping to maintain those core city services. And thankfully, council has adopted fiscal management policies that include service priorities that they've adopted. Included in service level 1, which is the highest level of service, is the funding for the Intergovernmental Human Services Program. This program supports the human services work that's being done that's tied into so many other priorities, homelessness services, community safety. It's very connected to all of those things. They're essential components of that. The Human Service Commission is the established methodology for Eugene to do its part to support that. I know that working through collaborative intergovernmental organizations can be difficult, and I'm sure there have been challenges with this methodology. But given that we don't have a different methodology in which we're really looking at this in a cohesive way, really as we're moving forward, this understanding how we are implementing that city priority to provide those services, be it through the Human Services Commission or be it through some other means, I think is going to be really important. Because I do feel that when we're looking at those core services, cutting them would negatively impact many, many of our priorities. And I'm out of time.
Thank you. Councilor Ye, and then we have Councilor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. So like Ryan, I also freaked out for a moment thinking that we were cutting something from neighborhood associations, only to find out that no, in fact, we're doing fine. I think it's just an opportunity for them to express the importance of the work that they do and to remind all of us that while it's an area that's easy to cut. It's not always the best choice. And so I appreciate them coming here and sharing the importance of the organizations that they belong to. And that is all I have for now.
Thank you. Councilor Groves, followed by Raina Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. I want to lend my voice in support of the randomized list that's posted. I agree with everything I've heard as that being a positive. I've heard people complain about that as well. And at a time when we want to encourage community participation, I think this just makes it easier for those that have other things going on in their lives other than sitting watching Hollywood Squares here for hours on end. So I definitely support that. There's some other things that I would like to discuss, but I think I'm just going to wait and let things play out for a bit. I mean, we've got a lot of miles to go on this yet. I do have some concerns, but I'm just going to sit and watch this unfold for just a bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Raina will be followed by Councilor Syret.
I have no questions at this time. Thank you.
And Councilor Syret will be followed by John Jasper.
Thank you, Chair. So I appreciate Eliza commenting on the challenge of locating where things related to human services are in the budget. I've definitely experienced that challenge myself. But you can always ask staff to, to help point you, and this goes for everybody on the budget committee, to help pull out the information you're looking for. I mentioned last meeting that I was going to be making a motion around urban forestry to add a little bit of money. I think I'm going to keep it modest, $50,000 to our urban forestry, specifically for planting additional trees. And I spoke with the head of Public Works, and there is definitely capacity. If we granted that extra funding, it would be used for that. It could happen. I don't know yet where I'm going to propose taking the money from. I won't take it from neighborhoods, I promise. That would be counterproductive. And then I will have to review the chief's memo again. I tried to look through it today, but my head's been kind of scrambled this week. So if someone could tell me, if we add back the engine, does that mean we don't get to trial the CRU project?
What I think it means is that we would still be moving forward with the CRU. We wouldn't do it this year. So unless we reallocate or shift some of those CSI funds around. So it's anticipated in the CSI. And I think when we have our next work session on that and we look at what are the revenues and what's funded, we can kind of try to estimate a timeline of when we would bring that on.
Okay, so it's not necessarily overthrowing that idea completely.
No, we're going to implement a version of that idea. So this would, and the idea was we would shift to that service over the next 2 years, and we could have some financial savings with that, and then add back the engine. But we can do it the opposite too.
Right. Okay. Thanks. So yeah, so I've listened to the city manager and everyone's comments and the public comment, and I've been serving on the budget committee, not continuously, but I served starting in 2006 for 2 terms, and then I joined the city council in 2012. So I was there during the Great Recession when our economy froze up, and there was a concern that we might not have revenue to pay our bills, and we needed that reserve for revenue shortfall, so we didn't have to lay off our city staff. And so I'm just reflecting that this is not only a time of uncertainty in terms of just our future financial state, but there's these piles of money out there that may be coming in different ways and forms, and it's very confusing. So I really want to appreciate the city manager keeping us on the eye of our long-term financial stability. but also recognizing the short-term emergencies that we need to shore up. So, you know, some of this money that we're anticipating most likely will be used to provide temporary shelter for people who are currently unhoused, for example. I'll take a second round. I have a few more comments. Thanks.
Thank you. John will be followed by Catherine Ryan.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick. Let the rest of the conversation happen. City Manager Maderi, I really appreciate your comments, as well as the other members of the committee. Sounds like much of what I was trying to say the last meeting was heard. I will take your advice to the best I can in crafting my motions to allow you and staff as much flexibility as possible with sources of funding. Councillor Syret, it's my intention to be putting forward two motions. One would be to maintain existing service level of the engine out of Station 2. And then the second would be to start the pilot program of the CRU, you know, sooner rather than later, because I think that's an excellent plan. But I want to be able to split that up so we can mix and match as we have funding available and as the committee agrees with me or not. That's my intention, but the specific language obviously has to be worked out. But I appreciate all the work that you've done, and thank you very much.
All right, Catherine, and then myself.
Thank you. I wanted to say thank you to the city manager for kind of that update and like the specific vague kind of like future that's in front of us. That was really helpful for me just in terms of like understanding kind of what are our landmarks like that are out ahead, and how do some of those pieces fit together. So, and that was what some of my questions were around. So that was really helpful. I did want to make sure that I was tracking. So I know on the 19th, council is having a conversation around kind of follow-up conversation on the safe sleep sites kind of program stuff. Are there other policy related conversations around homelessness that are sort of pending or happening, or is it really kind of around that at this point?
Happy to speak to that, Catherine. So we do have that work session next week on the 19th, and the purpose of that work session is to provide an update where we are on the status of implementing per the plan that we had recommended for adding 200 car camping sites and 300 tent camping sites. And so we'll give an update on that. And then the next action is council will have a public hearing. I believe it's on June 14th regarding some parking changes that were recommended in response to car and RV parking.
Okay, awesome, thank you. I think I'm trying to piece together and recognizing that obviously with the CSI stuff, there's kind of more unknown than there is known at this point, and it feels like around homelessness response, it's less squishy, it's less sort of big and vague. And so that seems like that is a relatively accurate understanding of it at this point. And so then related to that was wondering if there is an estimate about kind of timeline for getting that information, kind of consolidated information around homelessness and community safety services. Since we have 2 more meetings, and just kind of having an understanding of when that might be available.
We're working on that right as we speak. We should have it out hopefully by the end of this week, if not on Monday.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. And then the other thing was kind of, I think Councilor Zelenka's funny metaphors, was thinking about also like, are there places trying to identify over the next 2 years with the ARP funds in particular, where there are places where we anticipate that revenue is going to kind of fall off, but likely come back again maybe not necessarily to the same level, but to some degree. And so can we sort of plug some of those things in the meantime, so that we're not running into this the one-time funds for ongoing stuff, but it's more of really bridging that gap for things in the interim, to not be having to look at sort of these bigger, longer term ongoing reductions, just as kind of a general approach. And then just a final comment on the CSI related stuff, and recognizing that there's been a lot of process happening, and just kind of a plea to keep that on the policy side, keep that work moving forward so that we can come back and make changes that are needed on the budget side, because it's been a year. And so I think there's very much a desire to keep that moving forward. So that's all.
Thank you very much. I want to thank our people who came to speak today from neighborhood associations. I really appreciate hearing about the work that is being done in neighborhoods around the city. The work that Whitaker has done on COVID is really spectacular. Ian honestly undersold himself. He didn't even mention the vaccination clinic that he did. I'm sorry, he did. But yeah, they've done really great work there, and neighborhoods do a lot. I don't think that they thought the funding was being cut, but they weren't completely sure. They were looking for that reassurance and the certainty. And in the process, I appreciate the reminder that it's a great area to maintain full funding on. I also definitely want to follow up on what Eliza was talking about with human services funding. I think that is a really important area to keep looking at. It's just a really critical service area. It is absolutely a core level 1 priority, both as Eliza pointed out, as defined by council, and also in terms of things that are urgent and immediate around pandemic usage, like Ryan was talking about earlier. So I definitely am looking forward to more conversations on that, seeing where some further research goes on that front and what kind of motions we have to review about that. And then I also just really want to, the other theme that I really keep seeing everywhere is homelessness. The mountain was fantastic, and there wasn't really room in that graphic for another path, but I think there's, in addition to the ongoing work that we're doing in the areas that you listed, City Manager, there's also a homelessness path on that mountain too. And once again, we've got, like Catherine said, that work session literally the day of our next meeting, and then continued ongoing work there as well. From watching that CSI work session, I also saw that homelessness is, through the community survey, tying in as the top priority when we talk about community safety in general, which makes sense. I don't think anyone in our community is less safe than those living unsheltered right now. So that is absolutely just another ongoing piece of the puzzle that continues to tie back to every other conversation we try to have. So I definitely think that's a really good area to keep focusing on. And other than that, I'm just encouraged by the direction we're going, and I think we're in good shape process-wise to get to where we need to get to on this budget. So I'm real happy to see that. That concludes all of our first rounds. So I'm going to, just like last time, offer Mayor Vinis a chance to chime in for a few minutes. And please, anyone who wants a second round, use this as an opportunity to indicate so. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I actually don't need to make any comments at this time. People have said many of the things that I would say, so I appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So we had Claire, Councilor Semple. I'm finding where people are. I wanted to go in the same order for this round too, because again, emulating in person. If we were in person, I would have done a second round robin and let half of us say pass. So the three hands in the original order puts us Councillor Semple, then Eliza, and then Councillor Syrat for round 2. And then we'll go to order of hands from there.
Go trees. Thank you, Claire. Totally support that. If I could have gotten first, I would have. But yes, let's do the trees. Thank you.
All right, and then Eliza, followed by Councillor Syrat.
So I wanted to say thank you to Councillor Syrat for mentioning that, ask staff. And so maybe that is sort of a more specific request. I completely understand why these service views are not included in the draft budget, because like some of them are like 20 pages long. The social services funding service view is 2 pages. And so it would probably be, given that that's an area that doesn't have its own separate department where you can kind of get a sense by looking, at what our planning and community development budget is, by looking at the planning department budget. If there's a way to get an update of just that social services service funding summary for this budget and how those services are being impacted in this budget, it would be helpful. As we're continuing these discussions of how do we preserve and our core city priorities as we're moving forward with all of this.
Thank you. Councillor Syrat.
Thank you, Chair. So just a little perspective on that, Eliza, because we don't run social services out of the city, basically, for the most part, our money is given to the Human Services Commission to dispense. And so that's why there's not a ton of detail, because we are not, except in very limited ways, engaging with social service agencies directly as a city. And then, the CAHOOTS budget, which ostensibly could be considered social service, is embedded within the police department budget and has been since its inception, I believe. So, but just going back to what I was saying, so I'm just appreciating and commenting on the fact that there's a lot of things going on. There's a lot of swirl. It's hard to keep track of which funds are coming where, when, and what we'll be allowed to use them for. But we are hoping that we will get some more funding out of the state legislature, specifically for shelter operations. That's being considered very strongly up at the state legislature. We might get a major federal infrastructure bill this year with our local congressman chairing the House committee that's going to be putting that together. So that bodes well for us to get some funding to build some things that our community may have been anxious for and we couldn't do otherwise. So there are still lots of opportunities. And then I heard a commitment from the city manager that for some of this, that has general fund implications of keeping the budget committee engaged beyond this formal, legally required budget committee process that we're going through the rest of this month. So I think that's a significant thing for a city manager to commit to, because it's not something that the city's required to do. I think it's a good practice, particularly in these times. So I look forward to those continuing conversations when they get a chance to occur. And then Councilor Zelinka was asking me via text what kind of trees we're going to plant and to provide the Latin names only. And I'm going to decline to answer that question.
That seems like a reasonable choice. I don't see any other hands, so I'm going to take a real quick second round to echo the comments about working with staff first, because it can't be overstated how well supported this committee is, and staff does really, really excellent work on our behalf. And these questions, when we have these questions, there's a lot of times it's one thing to try to answer it on the fly in a committee meeting, but given the opportunity to go do the research, that all of these questions can be answered, and staff is always happy to work with us on our background research as well as when it's time to craft our motions. Emphasizing completely that I was joking about blaming staff for the order, because never blame staff for anything. They're fantastic. They're spectacular. And then I forgot to mention in my first round that I also really like the idea with public comment here, but also maybe more so even at city council meetings, not after it's randomized, sharing that list in some way. I know there have been times in the before times, if you will, that I was giving when they were in linear order of when you signed up, and I showed up late to a meeting and I knew what order I was in because of where I was in line, and I was able to make decisions about whether or not to stick around, or whether I had to get home to do something, or whether to go grab dinner and come back. And having some idea how long it'll be until you speak is huge versus just sitting in a queue for an uncertain amount of time thinking I might be next at any moment. So yeah, I really appreciate that suggestion and would love to see a way for it to be implemented both here and at council. And that's all I really had. And I see Raina's hand. So let's go to Raina for a second.
Yeah, thank you. So I did have a question about the public testimony section. I know that some people submit via the online tool, and others may write in their comments. I'm wondering how we recognize that how we recognize that during these types of proceedings, where we say, these are the people who submitted the written questions or comments for us, which we will review or have reviewed, just for that transparency, for people to understand that it didn't go into a void, that we recognize that they sent it to us. And however that's done, if it is already done, this is my first time hearing the public comments, then great. But if not, something to consider.
And I see our city manager put her hand back up. I was pausing because you're already unmuted. I thought you might jump in and start answering.
Oh, I'm in such a quiet space. I can stay unmuted.
Ah.
Right? There's will anybody even know if I'm here, if I'm on unmute? I wanted to I've been listening to your comments and around how we track the social service, human service, and I'm struck by a feeling that I have every time we have this conversation, which I hope, at least in my tenure in this role, we all start to think a little bit more about how many of our city services are also human services, social services. And I think, so when you ask about where do I find this in the budget, I think what you're asking for is, where are the direct line items that are either funds that we're providing to the HSC or direct contracts we have with social service providers that are nonprofit, not city staff. But I do want to say that there is a tremendous amount of human service work that happens, for example, in the library, or happens with our fire and EMS providers, our police force. So there's just so much that I know when we talk about that, I think all of your city team feels like they're out there providing for the community in these ways. And I don't think you're looking for that. You're not trying to figure out well, how many hours does the library do X, Y, or Z? But I do want to make a plug for how our city takes care of the community.
Go ahead, Eliza.
Just to clarify what I'm looking for this, which you probably can't read over the screen, updated to include the draft budgets for this year. This was an amazing thing that staff did last year in the full budget that broke out Human Service Commission funding, CAHOOTS funding, the funding that the city spends on joint housing and shelter strategies and Dusk to Dawn programs, divided it out and sort of said, here's the amount for 19, 20, 21. And so as we're having these discussions, I know that this type of thing is not usually included in the draft budget. but given the distributed nature of these services, something very similar, it's on page 278 and 279 of last year's full adopted budget. It's very specifically what I was asking about. So and thank you to staff for creating it, because it was really
So I'll say, Eliza, I appreciate that. It was something from our conversations last year that came out of the budget committee that I saw that a need. One of the things that we'll be doing when we put together the information that Catherine mentioned last week and Ryan, will be adding to that. It won't just be homeless, it'll be some of those, but it won't look just like that, because a lot of those things, as Sarah just said, they they're cross-pollinated, they're redundant, because they could be social service or it's homelessness. So we'll be doing that. And then through this conversation, the thinking is on the city focus sections that we'll start to add more detail to budget information there, so you can make those ties instead of having to go through the document. So these conversations are super helpful for us to know what you're looking for and how we can provide that in a more readable fashion. So thanks.
Click my start button instead of my unmute button. I have Ryan and then Catherine.
And I had to find my unmute button. Just to respond to Raina, to my knowledge, and I haven't been here the longest, I don't think there is any sort of formal process for recognizing written comments sent to us. So I'd encourage you to just call it out. If there's something that catches your eye, or we can talk about establishing a formal process. I think it would be a good, transparent thing to do.
And Catherine?
Okay, and I'm going to bounce back over to the previous conversation. And I think just for point of clarity, so I appreciate that, that naming that. And I think that maybe the difference is that it is sort of that services provided directly by the city versus things that are contracted. Because for me, it's a lot easier for me to kind of wrap my head around and think of and imagine what's happening at the library and what's happening in those other direct city services. Whereas the other ones where it's contracting out for sort of specific programs or whatever that looks like, there isn't in the way it's sort of set up, aside from the adopted budget or what it sounds like staff is working on, which sounds amazing. There isn't really a place to find that and understand what it is and what the scope of it is. So I think if that's helpful, and Vicki, I think to your point, there is yes, it does all overlap, and it's all in what it is and where it comes from and who does it. All of those things are messy and funky. So I'm looking forward to what y'all have put together, and kind of the ability to just keep talking through it and figuring out sort of what are the pieces of it that different folks are interested in and how to share that out in sort of the most useful way for everybody. So thank you.
All right, thank you everyone. It looks like we are out of hands. So it sounds like we are all ready to move on to our wrap up and come back next week, unless, Counselor Zelenka, go for it.
I think it might be helpful if staff provided a link to the HSC budget so people can click on that and see the allocations. Because for people watching, we don't do social services the way a lot of jurisdictions do around the country. We don't have government directly providing the service to the human services kind of services to the needy folks. We do that through a process where we contract with nonprofits, which is also why we have 1 million nonprofits in Lane County. So and they do all the services and not government employees. So having access to that budget and the allocations of all the services that are provided by those nonprofits would probably be very helpful.
Ryan.
That's a good point. It would help to have that budget more visible, but I think what I'm talking about, and I think possibly what Catherine's talking about and others, there are social services provided by city staff that we may not technically define as social service, but they do fall in within what we're trying to collect into one place and look at to the extent we can. So, I mean, to look at one direct example, I mean, sweeping homeless encampments, Public Works and EPD are two city agencies that do that. So that would be, I think that would be a homelessness related thing that we would, we're talking about, right? And so that is not necessarily something that would fall within the HSC budget, right? So there are things within the city budget that we're hoping to bring to light.
Anything else anyone wants to chime in with? Going once, going twice. All right, next steps. So we have 2 more meetings. We'll be meeting again next Wednesday, May 19th, and the following Wednesday, May 26th. There will be opportunity for public testimony at both of those meetings. And if you have any additional questions, committee members, or any intended motions that you have and want to start workshopping, email Vicky. That's our go-to, work with staff. Looks like we've got a fair amount of people who are ready to go do their research, and I think we'll be having some people come back with new thoughts next week. I want to give a little reminder. I touched on this at the beginning, but I'm going to double back and let us know that what motions are going to look like. We're going to do it pretty similar to last year. So it's helpful when you signal that you intend to make a motion. You can do so at any time during our deliberations. Again, reach out to finance staff as you think of motions you want to propose. They can help with language and identifying where the funding could come from. And they're going to compile a list of all the intended motions submitted to them. And we'll include those as part of the meeting packet that gets sent in advance. We won't be entertaining any motions for discussion and deliberation until the final meeting on May 26th, which gives us the opportunity to hear all the information, receive responses to all of our questions, and receive public comment at each meeting that we're going to. And then at the meeting on the 26th, we'll be ready to discuss and vote. And once all those motions are received, I'll be working with finance staff to determine the order of those motions in that final meeting for discussion by the committee. So that's what we're looking at over the next 2 weeks as we work towards finishing this process and sending a budget to City Council, well, 2 budgets actually, urban renewal and the city budget, to Council for them to take the next step on. So with that, at 8:04 p.m., I believe we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.